Hey there, everybody. We're going to start the third set of notes on uh, evolution here. So we'll do the first half of them. So there'll be a part one and part two posted. So this will be part one. So this is evolutionary forces and populations. So we're going to start looking at how some of these forces affect populations. So, and mainly the populations part will come in part two. This is still going to be a lot about the forces. Um, so the big questions for the day: has evolution expanded since the days of Darwin? What causes organisms to go through evolutionary changes? And how does evolution affect populations? Okay, so Darwin was not the last evolutionary biologist. There's been more scientists since then that have worked a lot on evolution as well. The Origin of Species did not explain everything. That was Darwin's book, if you remember. Um, Mainly because Darwin didn't know everything about genetics at that time. He didn't know about genes and alleles. Like he knew there were traits, but there was no real understanding of how it went. So now we have what's called neo-Darwinism, or like basically using genetics along with all of Darwin's thoughts on natural selection and using all the details that we have now. And now this is sometimes called modern synthesis. Um, Three big name scientists that were involved in kind of the new age evolutionary theory was Haldane, Sewell, and Wright. So as we go forward here and we look at evolution and the definition here, the change in inherited characteristics of biological populations over successive generations. All we're talking about when we say this is change over time, right? This is just change in population over time, over generations. Okay. Um, this is going to be a little bit different because not being able to interact with you guys, I normally give a lot of examples in this PowerPoint, and I kind of have the class interact with me a lot, and I have you look at a lot of data because you're going to look at a lot of data on the AP exam. And so stuff like this kind of warms you up for questions like that. I'm just going to have to kind of, tell you what's going on. But I do think, when I bring up data and stuff like that, you should pause the video if you really want to help yourself. Pause the video and try and figure out what's happening before I get into it. Okay. Hang on one second. I got to pause just for a minute. All right. Sorry about that little break. The first diagram up here to the left with the average beak depth and the finch up there. If you look at the graph from 1976, it says similar to the prior 3 years, and you get almost 9 millimeters of beak depth, and that's kind of like from top to bottom. If you look from the side, how thick it is. And then 1978, a few years later, look how much bigger it is. But in parentheses there, it says after drought. So, the bird beaks were getting a lot bigger after that because you might think that, after a drought, not a lot of water. So the seeds and nuts and everything are much harder. So the ones that survived must have had a bigger beak depth because they can crush, fatter and harder seeds and nuts with their bigger beak depth, and then those are the ones that survive and pass on their traits. So the beak depth increased over those few years. If you look at the one at the bottom, take a minute and try and sort out what's going on there. You have some sort of allele frequency on the left, and then you're looking at latitude or areas from north to south down there along the bottom. So take a look and see what you think about that one real quick, and pause the video if you like. But basically how you read this, going up the left, you can see it's from 0 to 1. So 1 would be like 100%, right? So in Maine, 100% of the fish have that allele, where when you come down the coast, it gets a little bit more in the middle, right? Down to 60 and 50 and 40%. And you get a ton there, around 40, 30%. Have it in those middle latitudes there, so maybe halfway down the coast. And then you get down to Georgia, and very few of them have it. So, the question might revolve around, well, what would that allele be? Well, if 100% of them have it up in the really cold and, not very many of them at all have it down near Georgia, it probably has something to do with the temperature, right? So it's probably like the antifreeze allele that helps keep fish, from getting too cold. So that'd be something you might want to, take away from that graph. The ones on the right, we're going to come back to. there's actually some information missing. But notice how the ones on the bottom, even though they're still kind of crazy lines, they're a little bit more streamlined than the ones up top, and they're kind of all over the place. And I'll tell you why that is when we get there in a little bit. So as far as natural selection goes, these are traits that improve survival or reproduction, and they accumulate in the population, right? You guys know natural selection, right? You know the steps with overproduction and variation and competition and then reproduction and then, repeat. So you guys have seen this before. So if you look on the right-hand side, you see a mix of colors, and then after selection, the ones that were more reddish or pinkish survived, and the ones that were more yellow or orange didn't. And then your final population is much more, of the red and orange variety, right? So it changes based on what survives and reproduces, and that's kind of how it goes. So adapted change, some are adapted to better survive, at least to reproductive age. Selective change, those are better adapted, will reproduce, and their traits will be selected to continue in the population. Selected meaning you were selected to survive, right? You were able to survive that long, okay? Another diagram, so take a minute, check this one out, pause the video, see if you can sort out what's going on with this one. So assuming you paused it and tried to figure this out, what you're really looking at here, so if you look at the diagram right in the middle there where you kind of see what the colors are, you see that the purple box is for LAP95 alleles, and then the green is for other LAP alleles. And you can see like all the way going across from the sampling sites 1 through 11, it looks like the clock of the purple keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So there's more and more purple all the way around. Well, if we look at where those locations are, 1 is way back in Long Island Sound, and then 2 gets a little closer, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way out, and 8's right there getting, pretty close to the ocean. 9's out here on the ocean, 10, 11 as well, way out there. Now you're kind of in the open water, and so what would that allele probably have to do with if the more more of the mussels have this allele, the more they get out toward the open ocean. Hopefully your mind goes towards salinity, right? And it's kind of right there in the middle where that arrow going across right above Long Island there. Salinity increases toward the open ocean. So it makes sense that the mussels would have more alleles that would help it with salinity as it gets out toward the open water. There's lots of different types of natural selection. There's some specific types that we're going to talk about. So predation selection can affect the predator-prey relationship. You have things like camouflage and mimicry and speed and defenses that are all kind of this game of, back and forth. Like as one thing changes, the other thing changes. And so you get things that, blend in a whole lot better, and it improves camouflage. The better the predators get, then the better the prey get at hiding type thing. And so you can look at all these different types of, mimicry and camouflage here. Another one is physiological. Most of the time we only think of, natural selection kind of seeing things on the outside of the body, but a lot of things happen on the inside of the body as well. So it acts on body functions and structures. So disease resistance and protection and biochemical diversity and morphology, which is structure, and physiological efficiency, all of those things can be affected as well, even though we can't really see them. In this case, you're looking at, the snake and how he's evolved to basically open that jaw so wide to get that egg in his mouth. There's a bone in the back, you can see on the diagram, the very back, where kind of that really far back jawbone actually comes unhinged for a second, so he can open up his mouth all as wide as he can possibly get it to get that whole egg in his mouth. So pretty crazy that they evolved that. Another one is coevolution, where two things kind of evolve together. So reciprocal acts affecting each other's evolution. Again, predator-prey has something to do with this. Competition, symbiosis, relationships where two things are so interconnected that they're going to help each other evolve. And you can see when you look at this flower, the nectar is going to be way in the back. You can see, down in here is going to be where this guy has to go to get some nectar. And so he's evolved this really long appendage out here so that, basically when he comes up to the flower, he might be one of the only predators that can actually get in there. Wouldn't really say predator, he's not going to kill the flower, but one of the only ones that can feed off of it, and so and move and get the sweet nectar off of it. And so coevolution, definitely evolving together. Not too many things have evolved, an appendage like that in order to get at that flower like this guy has. So, question is natural selection the only way? And as a reminder, evolution is the change inherited in characteristics of biological populations over successive generations. Change over time, right? Is this the only way that things can change is through natural selection? And maybe based on the way I'm asking the question, the answer should be no. There's other ways. And so natural selection is not the only way that evolution proceeds. There's different mechanisms that come up. And one of them is called genetic drift. And as you can see with my big red letters up there, it's random. Okay, so this one is a random process. And this is allele frequency changing due to random chance. So it's not selective, it's not adaptive, this is dumb luck. This just happens regardless of the fitness of the individual. Okay, kind of like a gumball machine, right? You have all the colors of a gumball in there, and you can put your quarters in, and you're not going to always get the same percentage out of there, right? It's random what you're going to get. So as we move from left to right across these kind of fake gumball machines here, at least that's what I call them. Let me keep my dog from barking here. Hang on. Okay, so as we move from left to right here, you can see the initial frequency and then the 5th generation and the 10th generation. You can see the numbers are, they started off even initially, 20% of everything. And then you look at the middle one. Well, now you're up to, 40% of some of them or one of them. And then, a couple stay at 20, a couple really drop in. And then you look over to the other side. And we've lost some colors, right? There's only, 3 colors left, and, green's on its way out too. So basically by random chance, some things are going to not pass on traits that are gonna survive. So just kind of a random genetic drift as far as when we're talking allele frequency, right? It's kind of like big T, little t in your Punnett squares, and that's always a 50-50 chance. So sometimes you pass on the right ones, and sometimes you don't. So these kind of get back to those diagrams I had earlier on that second or third slide, and what I really didn't show you back then was the population numbers. So here, if you look here, this is a population of 20, this is a population of 200, and this is a population of 2,000. So why would these lines look really crazy up here, and here they get a little more straight, but they have a little wiggle to them, and now these are even getting more and more straight. So, the bigger the population, then it can withstand some irregularities in the genes and in the alleles and how they're randomly selected. So, if you have a huge population, hang on one second. Sorry about all this. Excellent. All right, I'm sorry again for the interruption. This is what happened when I try to do things at home and there's no one else around to watch the dogs because it's apparently busy in the neighborhood and they're all looking out the window and barking. So back to these diagrams over here. So population of 20, 200, and 2,000. So if you had 10 things that randomly change in a population of 20, that's a big deal, right? And so you get all these crazy lines, and the allele frequencies are going to get all kind of wonky because there's a lot of change for 20 things. But if you have 10 things out of 200, not as big a deal, and 10 things out of 2,000, definitely, not going to make much of a speed bump there. So a lot of it has to do with population size. And as if you can tell in the words up here, it says the effects of genetic drift are far more impactful on smaller populations. And this is why, right? Because smaller populations, if you have a change with just a few things, that's going to really dramatically affect that population. If you have a change in a big population, not so much. Okay. So eventually, what genetic drift does, it will either cause elimination or fixation of the allele. So it will go to 0% or 100% respectively, as long as you give it enough time. It will work toward one end or the other. Okay. So let's talk about some specific examples of genetic drift here. Okay. So the founder effect is a type of genetic drift. Okay. So founders, right? A small group of individuals that start a population somewhere else. So these are like, settlers and pioneers. Some rare traits could become fixed, meaning now that they have a small group, their gene pool is much smaller. They're probably only going to breed with that small group around them. Then a lot of traits could become fixed. But other traits, maybe only, 3 people had a particular trait out of the 30 people that settled somewhere. Well, depending on how the mating goes, how the alleles go, those traits might get lost altogether and then never be seen again in that population. So traits can become fixed or lost, and so it can happen in a variety of places. But where do you think this might happen? Stop the video, and where might this be likely to happen? Okay. So one place that might be likely to happen would be like islands, right? So founder effect, things get blown to an island, and they're the only things living there, and so their gene pool is whatever they brought with them. So things can go, toward 100% or towards 0% very quickly. Um, this picture down here in the bottom left, the X-ray, the polydactyl. First of all, that trait is dominant. Okay, that's a dominant trait for human beings. Having 6 digits is dominant. Okay. And I know people always ask me about that, like, why would that not be recessive? Well, don't confuse dominant with prevalent. Okay. There's lots of traits that we have that are more prevalent in our population that are recessive. Okay. So it doesn't matter that whether it's dominant or recessive. Um, there can be lots of things, lots of alleles in our population that are recessive. Okay, this one happens to be dominant, and so it's just most people right now are recessive for this. And so if you have like little p, and most people are little p, and most people in the population are little p. Like if you think about a Punnett square, then there's nowhere to get a big P, and so most people show up with 5 digits instead of 6. But certain populations, they have this trait show up a lot more because they have a particular group that they might breed in. One thing is polydactyl is much more likely in the Amish population. And so their percentage of people that have polydactyl is much higher because they're a small population as far as they don't mate outside of their Amish community, and so that trait has not, left their gene pool. So more people see that than other places. So, and again, just another gumball example, and you can kind of see, how this might go, where you pull out a random sample and you only got 2 red ones and a bunch of green ones, and then over time, the red ones were actually the ones that were more advantageous, and it actually switched to be the red population. So it can go both ways. Bottleneck is another type of genetic drift. So just like what it sounds like. So if you fill a bottle up with a bunch of marbles, you turn it over, do they all come pouring out? No, they don't. Only a few of them come out, and the rest get stuck at the neck, right? And so now, if there's some sort of event that causes a bottleneck, we only get a few living organisms. So what you're left is a much smaller gene pool. Okay, so if you look at the parent population bottle and we turn it over and we have this drastic reduction in population, only a few things. So the third image over there, surviving individuals, is just a small group, but look at how much bluer they are. And so now the next generation is far bluer of a bottle than it was in the parent generation, which had more yellows, or at least 50-50. So, that's kind of what can happen. And the main things that happen with bottleneck are things like natural disasters. Okay, so you have a loss of habitat, or you have famine. You just have a big portion of a population wiped out, and so you're left with this small gene pool, and then you have this randomness to that, right? There was no natural selection there. It was just random that who survived and who didn't. So another bottleneck slide here. Cheetahs have gone through 2 bottlenecks. Okay, there was an ice age 10,000 years ago, which really hurt them, hurt their population, and then overhunting more recently. And so cheetahs have been kind of brought to the brink of extinction, to where that all the cheetahs in the world that are alive right now are like 99% the same in their genetics. And so they're really closely related. All the cheetahs on the planet are really closely related genetically. And so the problem with that is if something comes around and there's a disease or something that they don't handle, like, cheetah coronavirus, then, they wouldn't last and they would go extinct. So that's why it's bad to have such a small population, right? And especially to have their genetics being so similar. Okay, that would be a problem. Sorry, there's the the words there that I was just talking about. Didn't mean to click so quick, but you can pause it and read that really quick. So, and then we talk about another bottleneck over here of the Great Prairie Chicken. Okay, so if you look at this one, I always ask my class about this one too. So pause the video and take a look at it and see what you can determine. When did this bottleneck happen? That's what I always ask. See if you can figure out when the bottleneck happened. Okay. So again, hopefully you paused the video and tried to check this out. If you look at the what the range was in around 1820 was all the green part of Illinois. Okay, so a huge range, and now we have two little dots, and it's in southern Illinois. Okay, so if we look at the dates and the numbers down here, let me grab a pen. So we look at the 30s and the 60s, and we had between 1,000 and 25,000, right? But here in 1993, we had less than 50, right? And in Kansas in 1998, we had about 750,000, no bottleneck. Nebraska 1998, no bottleneck, 75 to 200,000. Things are looking good. So really, you have to come back here, and if I were to ask for a range, it would have to be sometime between the 1960s and 1993 when the number went from here to here, right? We got down from, in the many thousands down to less than 50, right? And so what probably happened to cause this bottleneck? This was all their territory up here. So what happened to reduce their range to just these two little dots over here? Well, what's up here, guys? Okay, maybe not quite that far up, but this whole area up here is, you have Chicago up here, and then all the areas around it, and the cities just got a lot bigger, and the suburbs got a lot bigger, and it took up a lot of that range from them, and they kind of got forced out of their habitat, and, down to a little small place. Luckily, Kansas and Nebraska have quite a few, so they're not going to go extinct, but that's how a bottleneck can work anyway. Gene flow. Okay, so this doesn't fall under genetic drift. This is its own thing. Okay, and it's really what it sounds like. Gene flow sounds like the flow of genes. Okay, how allele frequencies of the population can change due to immigration and emigration. So things moving in and out of the population. Okay, this can lead to equalizing the two populations. So we're looking at some deer here, and we have the western deer population, we have the eastern deer population, and we have this mountain range in between them. But right here, there's a pass. So this is where they can actually mix, right? So now we have a couple of the western deer coming over here to the eastern deer, and can they mate together? Sure, they can. So if this keeps happening, if these two groups, okay, this group and this group, if they keep mating, what's going to happen between the two groups? Will they get more similar or will they get more different? Well, if they keep mixing the gene pool and they keep mating with each other over time, those two populations will get more and more similar, right? This is going to lead to the equalizing of these populations. And eventually, if it happened long enough, there really wouldn't be a difference between them. They would become the same. Okay. Another example of gene flow between caribou, you have the porcupine herd and you have the 40-mile range herd, and then you have this giant overlap, okay, right here in the middle where they mix. And so they can mate with each other, and they will end up becoming more and more alike each other, and their gene pools will kind of become one. Okay, so that's gene flow. Flow of genes, just mating with other groups and getting more and more equal. So now we get into a few others, one called sexual selection. So this is kind of a quote from Darwin, kind of a funny quote. The advantage that certain individuals have over others of the same sex and species solely with respect to reproduction. So advantages that people have over other people with respect to sex and reproduction. So translation, the traits that get you mates, right? And so the ability to attract a mate. And obviously this doesn't just apply to people, it applies to all sorts of animals out there. And so in this case, peacock, what beautiful tail feathers you have, right? And so they're doing this to attract mates, right? And lots of organisms have flashy appearances in order to attract a mate, right? So that's just kind of one thing about a lot of populations that happens. So we have sexual selection here. Um, so a change in the frequency of alleles in a population due to gender preferences. Okay, so let's check out, take this off for a minute. Let's check out the frog call here, right? Look at this data and tell me, pause the video, look at the data, and tell me what you notice about the frog calls. Okay. So if you took a look at the frog calls, we have recording of the SC males call. SC is short call, LC is long call. Okay, and you can see, through his little diagram here, his call doesn't last as long as this guy's call over here. And so if we go down to this chart and we look at the results, right? 1995, long call better, no significant difference. Long call better, next year, no significant difference. Long call better, long call better. So there's either no significant difference or the long call is better, right? The short call doesn't really do as well, right? And so that's due, obviously, due to like sexual selection. The one is getting better mates because he has or more mates because he has the better call. Okay, that's what we would call sexual selection. Okay, and we'll have some other examples along the way. So another question here is, do you need to survive mating? Kind of a weird question. Do you need to survive mating? This is literally one of the best video clips we watch of the year. So I generally wait and we go through the rest of the notes. And then we watch this at the very end of class. Check it out at some point. It's pretty crazy. So a couple different versions of sexual selection. Intra-sexual selection. This is between members of the same sex, right? Intra means same. So now you're talking about, males fighting males, females fighting females, that sort of thing, where there's a competition between the same sex in order to get the privilege to mate with the opposite sex, or the one that you're trying to be able to mate with. And so, you see the kangaroos up here and they're kind of boxing each other, and you see the crabs down here and they're fighting each other. You see the elk down here and they're kind of battling each other for the right to kind of mate with the female, right? Most of this happens between males. It does happen the other way sometimes, but a lot of this happens between males in order to earn the right to mate with the female, and the female will want to mate with the one that wins. Okay. Intersexual selection, this is the opposite. So now it's not really competition like they're going to fight, but there is this kind of game, this competitive game of trying to get the mate to notice you. And so what this ends up being, if you think about a lot of males and females in the world, like when you look at ducks, mallards, right? Some mallards have green heads and some have brown heads. Well, the green ones are a little bit prettier. Which ones, is it males or females that have the green heads? If you don't know, it's the males. The males are green head, and the females are just the brown, where they're all the same color as the rest of the duck. And so same thing with cardinals, right? We have the baseball cardinals, we have the red birds, right? Well, the red cardinals are the males. Okay, you have brown cardinals too. There are brown cardinals that fly around, and those are the females, and they're not as pretty, right? They're just not. They're more of the brown colors, and so they don't stick out like the red cardinals, because what happens here is males are trying to show off. We have showy males. They're trying to puff their chest out like this bird on the right and draw attention to themselves, and they're trying to show off and attract a female. And so a lot of the males in the animal kingdom are the showy ones. But what happens is it still ends up being female choice. Even a male can strut his stuff all he wants, but a female doesn't have to do it. And so it ends up being female's choice, even though the males are the prettier ones. So this is kind of a little different competition, just kind of a game within a game, if you will. A little bit more about sexual selection. Why does this even occur, right? Well, a lot of it happens because many of these traits, whether they're the male traits or the colors or anything like that, some of them serve as genetic fitness markers. So this is what we call sexual dimorphism, where you see the difference, the different appearances between the genders, right? We know that male lions have the manes and females don't. Okay, and you have the elk down there with the antlers, and females don't. Does don't have them, right? And I just told you a lot of the birds, the more colorful birds are the males, and the females don't have those, pretty colors and stuff like that. So this is, if you can tell male from female just by looking at them, that's what sexual dimorphism is. Okay, but what happens is some of these are actually fitness markers. So if you look at this lion, he has a pretty dark mane. So what scientists figured out is the darker the mane, the more testosterone that lion has. So female lions have kind of figured this out as well. And so female lions want their cubs to be super strong and really aggressive and be able to, lead the pride and have a dominant offspring. And so they try to mate with the lions that have the darker manes because they're more dominant and they're more aggressive and they have more testosterone. So some of these things, even though they just kind of look different or look pretty to us, they actually do show or a trigger to the mates that there's something better about them. Okay. So evolution occurs in population. So it emerges from the selection of individuals by the environment. Remember, an individual cannot change during its lifetime, right? I can't get taller, unfortunately. You can't change what your genetics were at birth is what you are, and you really can't change that, right? So no individual can change, but over time, individual changes that occur because of passing traits on generation after generation, then the population will evolve, right? And so there's three modes of what we call selection. There's directional, stabilizing, and disruptive. Okay, you guys should have done these in regular bio actually, or pre-AP, either one. So directional selection. Okay, so this is where you start at one end and then something happens over time, and the selection forces things to change the other way. So in this case, we have the light-colored mice at the top and just one dark brown mouse, right? And so far fewer of him, but the dark brown mouse has a higher Darwinian fitness than the tan mice, right? So the brown mice, after many generations, I know it only shows you one other picture, but notice the arrow in the middle says many generations, right? So after many generations, the brown mice outcompete the other ones, and so it ends up that they shift from one end to the other. So when we say directional, it means um, you're going to have this change, and like there were more light colored ones, and now the change is going down here to the dark colored ones. So now our hump, right, is further down this way than it was up there. And so this is a directional change. It's going one way or the other, right? So you'll end up with a lot of individuals at one end or the other. Okay, that's direct. In this case, stabilizing. When I hear the word stable, it's good. You're average. You're in the middle. You're not really too extreme either way, right? You're kind of neutral. And so neutral is where the biggest hump is in the graph, right? So why is it good to be average? So if you look at this one, and you think about bird eggs, right? A few bird eggs versus many bird eggs. Why would it be good to have most of the brood sizes be an average number of eggs? If you only have one or two, what's the problem with that? You would get a lot of parental care. Mom and dad could feed you very easily. Yeah, but what happens if something did happen to you? Then you don't have a very big population to pass on, right? It's harder to compete. And so if one or two of the birds die, then that family is going to go down and that's just going to drop the population number. But if you have a lot of eggs, right, that you would think that would increase the chances that the population would continue. But it's really hard for mom and dad to feed, and they end up wearing themselves out. And sometimes the parents die trying to feed the kids, and so then the kids are in bad shape too. So it's really better to have a middle size brood size with just a few eggs, maybe 3 to 5, and so that way you can feed them all, and most of them will grow up and survive, and the population will keep going. Another good example of stabilizing selection is spiders. Why would it be good to be the average size spider? Stop and think about that for a second. So you have tiny spider, you have a large spider, you have a middle spider. Why is it good to be the middle one? Well, if you're the big one, right, you might think it's better to be the biggest one, right? So you're the big bad spider, and you can outcompete anybody except the human that sees you, right? So you can't hide very well. Humans see big spiders and they tend to crush them. Okay. And if you're the tiny spider, you can hide from all the humans, but you can't compete with the other spiders very well. The one in the middle, he can hide enough and he can compete enough in order to make that more advantageous to survival. Okay. So let me get rid of that. And then we have disruptive. So in this case, disruptive, kind of like what it sounds like, it's good to be at either end. You can be here or you can be here. You just do not want to be this guy in the middle. Okay, so that's my don't do that sign. Okay, so in this case, you don't want to be the one in the middle, but you can be either one on the end. Okay, this is slightly different from directional. Remember, directional, you have to be at one end. And this, in disruptive, you can be at either end. You just don't want to be in the middle. So it's the opposite of the stabilizing one. And an example of that, these shells down here are called limpets, and it's not a great picture. But the idea with limpets is you have light colored limpets and you have dark colored limpets, and then you have these in between colored limpets. The problem is the rocks that these limpets live on are usually either very light or very dark. Okay, so the light ones can blend in with the light ones, the dark ones can blend in with the dark ones, and the ones in between don't blend in with anything. So then, other predators come by and take them and eat them. So it's not good to be in the middle. It's better to be at one end or the other. Okay, so that's kind of the idea with disruptive. Okay. So that's it. So sorry for some of the interruptions at the beginning of this. I hope it wasn't too terrible. But that's half of the notes, and I'll save the other half for another video. Okay, so here's some practice questions for you. Good luck.